The champagne glass trembled in my hand as I watched my father kiss his new bride. 28 years of memories crashed through my mind like a tidal wave. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, bedtime stories, all now tainted by the truth I had uncovered. But the memory that hit the hardest? My mother's final words. "Promise me, Deborah. Promise me you'll make things right." And I had. I had promised her on her deathbed that I wouldn't let my father rewrite history. That I wouldn't let him bury the past the way he buried her. I had kept that promise. Now, at his wedding reception, in front of 200 guests, it was time for him to face the truth. A toast to the happy couple. Pierce, my father's business partner, lifted his glass. The ballroom shimmered under the golden glow of chandeliers as guests raised their glasses in unison. I didn't move. I kept my champagne glass firmly on the table. The silence stretched. I felt my father's eyes on me before he even spoke. "Deborah," his voice carried that familiar warning tone. "Stand up. Show some respect." I lifted my gaze, meeting his. Kenneth Blackwood. My father. A man the world admired, a self-made millionaire, a philanthropist, a devoted family man. But I knew the truth. I said, "Stand up." His smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. I shook my head. "I can't, Dad." A flicker of unease passed over his face. Beside him, Rosalind, his new wife, placed a delicate hand on his arm. "Kenneth, it's okay." "No, it's not." His voice turned cold. He stood, the room falling into hushed silence as every pair of eyes turned to us. "My daughter seems to have forgotten her manners. Perhaps she'd like to explain to our guests why she's choosing to disrespect her father on his wedding day." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my burgundy bridesmaid dress. I spoke clearly, my voice steady. "I'm not disrespecting anyone, Dad." I took a breath, feeling the weight of my mother's letter inside my clutch. "I'm honoring a promise." "A promise?" My father's voice dripped with mockery. "To whom?" I lifted my chin. "To Mom." The color drained from his face. Rosalind's fingers clenched around the stem of her champagne flute. Pierce suddenly looked very interested in his drink. The tension in the room thickened like a storm cloud. "Your mother has been gone for 2 years," my father said through clenched teeth. "This behavior is beneath you, Deborah. You're making a scene." A slow smile curved my lips. "You're right, Dad. I am making a scene." I picked up my champagne glass, twirling it between my fingers. Then, I set it down, deliberately, purposefully. "But trust me, this is nothing compared to what's coming." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You're a disgrace," he spat. "Leave. Now." "Gladly." I grabbed my clutch and walked away, head held high. But not before catching the subtle nod from Rosalind's cousin. I wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. As soon as I stepped into the hotel corridor, quick footsteps followed behind me. "Deborah, wait." I turned. Yenia. My mother's closest friend. Are you okay, Mamor? She asked, her dark eyes full of concern. I pulled out the letter, 6 pages of truth, written in my mother's trembling hand. The letter that would shatter my father's perfect world. I'm fine, actually, I said, gripping the letter tightly. Better than fine. Yenia's gaze dropped to the envelope, and she inhaled sharply. Is that? I nodded. Remember what Mom always said about karma? A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. She comes when she's ready. I tucked the letter back into my clutch. Well, I whispered. Karma's about to make one hell of an entrance. Later that night, I sat in my hotel room, the letter spread out before me. My mother's voice echoed in my mind as I read. Deborah, my love. If you're reading this, it means he's finally done it. He's moved on. And now it's time for you to know the truth. The truth. I had spent my whole life believing my father was just a cold man. Distant. Unforgiving. More devoted to his money than his family. But my mother's letter told a different story. A darker story. Your father wasn't always like this. He changed after Maria. Maria. I frowned, skimming further. Before he met me, there was another woman. Maria Lancaster. I never met her. But I found the payments, Deborah. Every month, for 25 years, your father has been paying someone to keep her quiet. I swallowed hard. What kind of secret had been worth a quarter of a century of silence? And why had my mother waited until now for me to find out? My phone buzzed. Unknown number, meet me at the hotel bar. We need to talk. Anne. I exhaled sharply, folded the letter carefully, and slipped it back into my clutch. If there were answers to be found, I was going to get them. And if my father thought he had buried the past, he was about to learn a painful lesson. Some truths refused to stay buried. The bar was dimly lit, with the murmur of quiet conversations and the soft clinking of glasses. And was already waiting for me in a corner booth. 2 martinis sat on the table, one pushed slightly toward my side. You came, she said as I slid into the seat. You texted, I replied. She studied me for a moment before reaching into her purse and pulling out a folded newspaper clipping. Before we talk, look at this. I unfolded it, my heart pounding. A grainy black and white photo stared back at me. It showed my father, a younger version of him, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. They were smiling, caught in a moment of shared triumph. I scanned the article. Local businessman Kenneth Blackwood and partner, Maria Lancaster, celebrate successful fundraiser. My blood ran cold. Maria, I whispered. Anne nodded. She disappeared a year later. No explanation. No records. Just gone. I traced the image with my finger. My mother knew about her, I murmured. And tilted her head. How do you know? I took a deep breath. Mom left me a letter before she died. She said my father had been paying Maria for 25 years. Anne's lips parted slightly, her expression unreadable. Paying her, she echoed. To keep quiet. A slow realization dawned in Anne's eyes. You think he? I don't know, I admitted. But if he was hiding something for that long, it's big. Anne sat back, her fingers drumming lightly against the table. I can help, she said finally. I have access to financial records at the firm. If the payments are still happening, I can trace them. I hesitated. Why would you help me? She smiled, but there was a hard edge to it. Because Rosalind is my cousin, she said. And I won't let her end up like your mother. I exhaled slowly. Okay. But we need to be careful. Anne nodded. Then let's get to work. The next morning, I stood outside my father's office building, my pulse thrumming in my ears. His empire towered over me, glass, steel, and the weight of 1,000 secrets. I had only been here once before. Years ago. But I knew exactly where I needed to go. His private office. The place my mother had told me to look. I took a steadying breath and walked through the revolving doors. Good morning, Ms. Blackwood, the receptionist greeted with a polite nod. I forced a smile. Morning. My father forgot some wedding documents at home. He asked me to bring them to his office. She didn't question me. Of course she didn't. No one ever questioned a Blackwood. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into my father's office and locked the door behind me. His desk was impeccable, every paper neatly stacked. But my mother hadn't told me to look here. She told me to check the safe. My eyes darted across the room. Then I saw it. A small, steel safe tucked beneath the bookshelf. I dropped to my knees, my fingers trembling as I pressed my ear to the cool metal. My mother had always been meticulous. She had told me once, in passing, that my father used the same number for everything. Men like your father always pick something they won't forget. His birthday. I punched in the numbers. 0-6-1-7. The safe clicked open. My breath caught. Inside were 2 folders, a black notebook, and a stack of bank statements. I grabbed them all. Then, just as I was about to stand, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, get out. Now. My stomach twisted. I snapped the safe shut, shoved the files into my bag, and bolted. As I stepped out of the office, I heard voices. My father's. He was in the hallway. And he wasn't alone. I barely made it to the elevators in time. I hit the close door button repeatedly as my father's voice echoed down the hall. I want the full report by Monday. No excuses. The doors slid shut just as his shadow passed the glass wall. I exhaled shakily, gripping the bag tighter. As soon as I reached the street, I ducked into a cafe. Hands shaking, I opened the black notebook. What I saw stopped my heart. It wasn't financial records. It was letters. Dozens of them. From Maria. Kenneth, you promised you'd fix this. I can't do this alone. Our son deserves better. I froze. Our son. I flipped through the pages, my pulse pounding. The letters continued. He looks just like you. Please, at least send enough so I can get him the medical help he needs. My mind reeled. My father had a son. A child with Maria. And he had spent 25 years hiding him. I barely had time to process the revelation before my phone buzzed again. Unknown number, come to 42nd and Park. You need to see this for yourself. I didn't know who was texting me. But I knew one thing. The truth wasn't finished revealing itself yet. The address, 42nd and Park, led me to an old cafe on the corner, the kind with peeling wallpaper and a broken neon sign. I stepped inside, scanning the dimly lit space. Then I saw her. A woman with storm gray eyes and auburn hair, sitting in the back booth. She looked up as I approached, her fingers tightening around a manila envelope. "You're Deborah," she said. It wasn't a question. "And you are?" I asked cautiously. She slid the envelope across the table. "My name is Evelyn Carter," she said. "And I know everything about your father." My breath caught. "How?" She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because he ruined my mother's life too." I hesitated before opening the envelope. Inside were photographs, receipts, and copies of old checks. I spread them out on the table, my fingers trembling. One photo made my stomach drop. It was a younger version of my father standing beside another woman, Evelyn's mother. "Maria Lancaster," Evelyn said, watching me carefully. "My mother." The room tilted. "Wait," I whispered. Your father's daughter," she finished for me. "Your half-sister." My mind reeled. I stared at her, at the same sharp cheekbones, the same determined set to her jaw. It was undeniable. "How did you find me?" I finally managed. "Because your mother found me first," she said. "She sent me letters before she died. She wanted me to know the truth. That my father was a liar. A thief. And worse." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean, worse?" She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Your mother thought my mom was the only other woman." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But she wasn't." I stared at Evelyn, my heart pounding. "There were more?" She nodded grimly. "At least 3 others. Maybe more. He's been paying them off for decades." I ran a shaky hand through my hair. "Does Rosalind know?" "Not yet," Evelyn said. "But she will soon. If you want to take him down, I can help you." I hesitated. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my father's approval. Now I was about to destroy his entire world. "I need to think," I murmured. Evelyn's eyes softened. "Take your time. But don't take too long. Men like him? They always have an exit plan." I exhaled sharply. She was right. If I wanted justice, for my mother, for Evelyn's mother, for all the women he'd ruined, I had to act fast. And I knew exactly where to start. That night, I returned to my father's mansion. The house was dark, except for the faint glow from his office window. I had spent my childhood in this house, running through its marble halls, believing it was a home built on love. Now I knew better. I slipped through the side door, my heart hammering. His office door was locked. But I knew where he kept the key. Under the 3rd book on the 2nd shelf. Just like my mother had told me. I stepped inside and headed straight for the safe. This time, I wasn't searching blindly. This time, I knew exactly what I was looking for. I entered the code. The safe clicked open. Inside was a thick folder labeled Private. I grabbed it, flipped it open, and felt my stomach drop. Because the first document wasn't a bank statement. It was a death certificate. For Maria Lancaster. Evelyn's mother. Date of death, March 3, 2002. But Evelyn had told me her mother disappeared, not that she had died. And that's when I knew. My father hadn't just abandoned Maria. He had silenced her. I barely made it out of the mansion before my father returned. As soon as I reached my car, I locked the doors and opened the folder again. There were more documents. Medical reports. A coroner's statement. And one letter, tucked between them. It was written in my father's handwriting. To whom it may concern, it began. Maria Lancaster's passing was a tragic accident. Any inquiries regarding her estate should be directed to my attorney. This matter is closed. Closed. Like she was just a business deal gone wrong. I clutched the paper so tightly my hands shook. My father hadn't just cheated and lied. He had covered up a woman's death. And now, I had the proof. I grabbed my phone and dialed Evelyn's number. "Meet me. Now," I said. She didn't ask questions. Because she already knew. Everything was about to change. I sat in stunned silence as Evelyn explained. After my mother left town, she sent me letters. The last one came in 2005. She told me she was scared. That she was being followed. Her voice wavered. And then she vanished. No body. No trace. Just gone. My pulse pounded in my ears. "And now we have this," I said, holding up the death certificate. But if she wasn't dead in 2002? Evelyn's jaw clenched. Then my father either faked her death, or he finished what he started later. I pressed a hand to my forehead. This was bigger than revenge. This was murder. And my father had covered it up. For years. "We can't go to the police yet," Evelyn said. "Why not?" "Because men like him have power. We need more than this." I exhaled sharply. She was right. We needed undeniable proof. So what do we do? Evelyn pulled out her phone. "We find out if my mother is really dead." My heart pounded. "And if she's alive?" Evelyn's gaze hardened. "Then we bring her back." The first step was checking records. We searched hospitals, shelters, anything. Then, on a late-night deep dive, I found something. A medical record from 3 months ago. A woman named Maria Lancaster had been treated at a small clinic in Arizona. My stomach dropped. Evelyn grabbed my wrist. "That's her." Her voice was hoarse. "She's alive." We booked a flight. As we drove to the airport, Evelyn looked at me. "Are you ready for this?" I met her gaze. More than ever. Because if Maria Lancaster was alive, my father's entire world was about to come crashing down. Evelyn and I boarded the red-eye flight to Arizona, both of us too wired to sleep. She clutched the file of evidence while I stared out the window, my mind racing. Somewhere out there, Maria Lancaster was alive. A woman who was supposed to be dead. A woman my father had erased. And now, after decades in the shadows, we were about to find her. The clinic was a small, run-down building on the outskirts of Tucson. We walked inside, hearts pounding. A nurse at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you?" Evelyn stepped forward. "We're looking for a patient." "Maria Lancaster." The nurse hesitated. "She doesn't get visitors." My breath caught. "So she's here?" A long pause. Then, finally. "Room 214. We stood outside room 214. Evelyn's hands shook as she reached for the doorknob. "Are you ready?" I whispered. She took a deep breath. "I have to be." She pushed the door open. Inside, a frail woman sat by the window, staring at the desert beyond. Her hair was streaked with gray, her frame thin and fragile. But when she turned, her storm-gray eyes were the same as Evelyn's. And the second she saw us, they filled with tears. "Evelyn?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Evelyn choked on a sob. "Mom?" The three of us sat in stunned silence. Maria reached out, brushing a shaky hand over Evelyn's cheek. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. Tears slipped down Evelyn's face. "We thought you were dead." Maria swallowed hard. "I almost was." She took a deep breath. "Your father, he tried to kill me." I felt sick. Maria clutched Evelyn's hand. He didn't want anyone to know the truth about his money, his affairs. When I refused to stay quiet, he arranged a car accident. A staged crash. Evelyn's face was pale. But you survived? Maria nodded. Barely. But I was too scared to go back. I let the world believe I was dead. She turned to me. And your mother, she knew the truth. She tried to find me. A lump formed in my throat. Maria gripped my hands. Deborah, she gave her life for this. My mother had died knowing all of this, but never having the chance to expose him. But now we could. Maria wiped her tears. It's time the world knows who your father really is. Evelyn and I exchanged a look. I pulled out my phone. Then let's finish this. Maria Lancaster wasn't dead. And by the time we were done, my father's life as he knew it would be. We needed to destroy my father publicly. Privately confronting him wouldn't be enough. He'd find a way to lie, manipulate, and cover it all up. We had to strip him of his power in front of the world. And we knew exactly where to do it. His upcoming charity gala. An event where hundreds of investors, business moguls, politicians, and media representatives would be gathered. The perfect stage. The perfect audience. The perfect trap. We started by leaking whispers of financial fraud to the press. Anonymous tips. Encrypted emails. A few well-placed rumors. Nothing concrete, just enough to make reporters curious. Then, Evelyn and I reached out to Rosalind, my father's new wife. If anyone deserved to know the truth, it was her. She agreed to meet us. And when she saw the evidence, she went pale. I knew he was hiding things, she murmured, clutching the papers. But this. Tears welled in her eyes. I left everything for this man. Evelyn leaned forward. Then help us take him down. For a long moment, Rosalind stared at the files. Then, with a trembling breath. Tell me what to do. Maria was hesitant about attending the gala. If he sees me, he'll know something is wrong. But we needed her. Her presence would be the final dagger. And when she finally agreed, my heart pounded with adrenaline. Everything was in place. All that was left was execution. The ballroom glittered with gold and crystal. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. My father stood at the center, smiling, shaking hands, completely unaware. Until Rosalind stepped up to the podium. And smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice smooth. Before we continue our celebration, I'd like to share something truly special with you. A pause. Kenneth, darling, why don't you come up here? My father looked confused but stepped forward. As he reached the stage, the screens behind him flickered to life. Images. Documents. Bank statements. His fraudulent transactions. Offshore accounts. And then, a photo of Maria Lancaster. The woman he'd tried to erase. Gasps filled the room. He turned, his face going white. And then, Maria stepped forward from the shadows. Hello, Kenneth. The color drained from his face. A microphone was placed in her hand. And then, she told the world everything. The audience erupted in chaos. Journalists rushed forward. Investors shouted. Security guards hesitated, waiting for orders. But my father was frozen. His world was collapsing. And as the authorities stepped forward, as the flashing cameras captured his downfall, I leaned in close and whispered, You called me a disgrace, Dad. I smiled. But now, the whole world knows who the real disgrace is. And as they dragged him away, I felt something lift from my chest. The weight of my mother's last words. I had kept my promise. And justice had finally been served. With my father gone, things slowly settled. Maria started a new life, free from fear. Evelyn and I stayed close, bound by what we had uncovered. And as I stood at my mother's grave weeks later, I whispered, "I did it, Mom." The wind rustled through the trees. As if she had heard me. As if she was finally at peace. And for the first time in years, so was I. The end.